Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm the president and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Thank you so much for joining our 2025 Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. Today, you will hear from second-generation survivor Mark Jacobs. Mark is the son of Holocaust survivor Mike Jacobs of blessed memory. Mike was born in Poland in 1925. In 1939, he and his family were confined in the Ostrowiec Ghetto. His parents, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, were murdered at the Treblinka Death Camp. Mike survived several camps, including Auschwitz, and was liberated from Mauthausen-Gusen II by the U.S. Army in 1945. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series: Dallas Jewish Historical Society, Green Hill School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, League of Women Voters, the Legacy Senior Communities, Mental Health America of Greater Dallas, and the Southwest Jewish Congress. We're very grateful for their support and partnership. I'd also like to extend a welcome to our museum members, volunteers, and Generations members who are with us today. If you'd like to get engaged with the museum and become a member or volunteer, please visit our website. We'd love to have you be part of our family. And lifetime board member just showed up. Good to see you, Marcia. In just a moment, Mark will share his father's story with you, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. If you're in the audience, please use the note cards that we gave you when you registered, and our volunteers will come by and pick them up. If you are online, use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. I'd also like to kindly ask you to silence your cell phones so we can listen to Mark's presentation without disruptions. So please also refrain from recording today's presentation. We're recording it, and it will be posted on the DHHRM YouTube channel in a few days. So if you'd like to rewatch it, you can go there to watch it. And now it is my pleasure to welcome Mark Jacobs.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mary Pat. Can everybody hear me back there? Okay, I'm Mark Jacobs, and as you were just told, my father was Mike Jacobs. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and I'll talk about us a little bit later on. I'm glad to see you all here to hear my dad's story. My father spoke about his experiences back. He came to Dallas in 1951, and he immediately began speaking about his experiences. He wanted people to listen to him, to hear what happened to him. It was very important to him that everybody learn about his experience, about what happened, primarily because he wanted everybody to be educated about the Holocaust and to make sure that it wouldn't happen again. And that is ongoing even now. It's so important that everybody understand what happened, given that there are a lot of people out there who deny the Holocaust ever took place, or it wasn't as bad as they say, because we all know how horrible it was. So I'm carrying on my father's mission. I have a niece who also is doing the same, Rivka, and hopefully we'll keep carrying it on forever. Anyway, just a second. Okay. So, my father, as you see, used to be named Mendel Yakubovich. That's his birth name. And he changed his name when he came to the U.S. Apparently, the story goes that when he got here, somebody said that Yakubovich was a little bit too difficult to pronounce and you should shorten your name. So he came up with Jacobs, which, as you see, is almost a shortened version of Yakubovich. He married my mother, Ginger Chesnick Jacobs, who was born in Dallas and lived in South Dallas, which was where the Jewish community predominantly lived in those days. Both of her parents were immigrants from what was then basically Russia or the Soviet Union. And they came originally, well, my grandfather came originally in like 1925, 1920, and he eventually had his wife came over and they married, and that's how my mother came to be. They met, actually, at the Jewish Community Center. My father's parents were Moshe Yakubovich. It's a tradition in Jewish life to name your offspring after somebody who's passed away. So my Hebrew name is Moshe. My sister's Hebrew name is Devorah, so she's named after our grandmother. And both my brothers were named after brothers of my father who were murdered in the Holocaust. It was very important for my father, as I mentioned, to remember what had happened, and he founded, along with a few other gentlemen at our congregation, Shereth Israel, which is where we belonged growing up and still belong. They started a survivors group, and their mission was eventually to build a Holocaust Memorial Center. And you see a picture of my father on your right, and in the white jacket. And if you notice in the middle, you have Elie Wiesel. Sam Zor is between him. Jack Altman is next to Elie Wiesel, and Max Glauben is next to Jack Altman. And some of you have heard Max Glauben speak, and his son Philip is sitting over there, and is also a 2G who speaks quite often. They began raising money for the Holocaust Museum, and eventually they were able to build it in the ground floor of the Jewish Community Center. And then my father, mother, and some other people in the community were instrumental in bringing the boxcar, which you can see in the lower part in the photograph there, and which was the first boxcar to come to the United States and be displayed in a museum. And you see the gates here and the memorial room. And you'll see this, if you take a tour of the Holocaust Museum, you'll see the boxcar, you'll see the gates, and you'll see the memorial to those who passed away in the Holocaust and who passed away later on.
And I always said to myself in camp that one day I'm going to be free. And the time will come. I will try to build a center, not a memorial stone, but a center that people can come, learn from the past, to look into the future. That should never happen again. That children, young or old, can come to the center and touch it and feel it and walk out and see what one human could do to the other. My speaking to you over here, or sharing my experience, it's not for me. I went through. It's for the future generations. That they can listen and look at it, look at a living survivor. Because I'm not going to be over here all the time. Someday I will have to go. They can say, yes, that's a survivor. He's telling the story. What one human could do to the other should never let it happen again. That's my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren should not go through the horrors and should be left to see what the parents or the grandparents should go through. That they should not go out from this Memorial Center for Holocaust Studies in Dallas.
So my father used to be a little bit concerned about his accent. He used to tell people that he had a South Texas accent. So I hope that you all are able to work your way through it. Us kids, we never thought that he had much of an accent because we were so used to him talking. It was only until much later on when I would hear him on a microphone that I realized that sometimes his accent was pretty heavy. So this is where it all began. Konin, Poland, which is halfway between Warsaw and Berlin. Small town, only about 10,000 people, 3,000 of whom were Jewish. My dad's family consisted of his parents. He had a couple of brothers. He had some sisters. He had lots of uncles and aunts and cousins all around that area. And I would say that his life was, he would probably say his life was pretty decent. They weren't wealthy by any means. They were probably, they got by. But the family was very close. He was active in the synagogue. He had a really good voice, so he sang in the choir. His father had a horse and carriage, and he would sometimes deliver goods in the area. They had a small little store, so they ran the little store. His brothers were studying to become tailors, and life was okay. He was the youngest, so of course he was a spoiled brat. And he had a fairly decent life. He went to Cheder, which is Hebrew school, so he could learn Hebrew and about Jewish life and Judaism. As I mentioned, he sang in the choir, which the building still exists. It was not destroyed during the Holocaust. And his childhood was pretty normal. These are some pictures of his family. You'll notice the little boy there, and that was a picture that was taken of him when he was very young, and it was a part of a class picture. And he showed us this picture. It was in a book that talked about the town of Conan. So I just looked for a picture who looked like me, and that turns out to be my dad. That's what I looked like when I was young. So he has pictures of some of his brothers. He has pictures of, if you see the four women below, those are pictures of cousins, two of whom look exactly like my nieces. One of his biggest regrets was that he could not find pictures of his parents.
Our city, as I mentioned before, they were all hard-working families. My family was working pretty hard to make a living, you know. My father, you know, had to work very hard to support, you know, 6 children, okay, till in 1935, if I'm correct, my brother became a master tailor. Let me explain to you what a master tailor is. He had to go to a special school to get a diploma that he can keep, you know, apprentices and to teach them to be tailors. At this time, we already did a little better living in our city. I remember, you know, that it was times, you know, that at night you didn't have any more bread, because it's not like over here you came into a home, you had enough bread, you cut as much as you want. Over there you had your slice or 2 slices of bread in the morning and lunch, and you came home for supper, the same thing, and you had to wait for next day to have you know, your other meal, because it was a very hard living. But we always had enough meat on the table. Friday night we had a nice Shabbos, you know. In the afternoon we had our cholent, you know, and other things, you know. We were a very, very close family, very, very close family.
And one of the things that was so important to my father was that we all be a close family as well. And I think you'll find that among survivors and their families, that having a close family was very primary in their lives. So, September 1st, 1939, the German armies invade Poland. The Soviet army invades Poland, and they divided Poland between themselves. The German army came into Conan, his hometown, and life changed forever. Around that time, they didn't come September 1st, it was a couple weeks later. It was the high holidays, our Jewish New Year, our Jewish Day of Atonement, and they came to the synagogue and made everybody come out, and it was at that time that they started desecrating the synagogue. And my father is going to talk a little bit about what that was like. And bear in mind, please, that my dad was born in 1925. You're talking 1939, so he's 14 years old.
In 1939, when the Nazis marched into our city, the first thing they did, they put a curfew. The Jewish people were not allowed to walk out from their homes from 6 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock in the morning, and the non-Jewish people from 9 o'clock till 6 o'clock in the morning. They took hostages, Jewish people and non-Jewish people. They put them to jail. They took also all the intelligentsia, the teachers. They brought them up to the Jewish cemetery, and they were shot. 99% non-Jewish teachers went into our beautiful ancient synagogue. They took out all the prayer books, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the prayer shawls, and all the religious memorabilia, and they put it into the square. After they emptied everything from the synagogue, they made a horse stable.
So I mentioned the gates of the memorial room, and that represents the burning of the scrolls and the prayer books. So soon after that, the Germans rounded up all the Jews of the town, and they sent them to another town called Ostrowiec, which also had a small Jewish community, and they made a ghetto of the Jewish section of the town where they put up fences and didn't allow people to go in and out during curfew. Everybody was crowded into small apartments, and that was what my father's life was for the first part of the war, and now he's going to talk about that.
We came into Ostrowiec. I remember Jewish people were waiting over there from the city. We went into a big school. And from over there, they tried to put us in different homes, you know. And I remember they put us in a home, 2 little small rooms, 16 people, 3 families. Our family consists of 8, and my future brother-in-law, and some other 2 families. A aunt of mine with the 2 daughters, and another, my future sister-in-law with the family over there, you know, because we were staying together. And the rest of my family, my relatives, I mean, were staying in different homes. And that was the ghetto. People died of hunger, of sickness. I remember, you know, as a small boy, I still did not believe what's going to happen.
His experience there also was when they were transported from his town to Ostrowiec, everybody was in the boxcars. And he talks about, he talked about to us how you'd have 75 to 100 people in a boxcar. And of course, that was his first experience about what life was going to be like in a crowded place. I was very fortunate to be able to visit Poland with my dad 3 times. And I believe on the second time we went to Ostrowiec. And that was the first time that he'd been there, I think, since he was there in the ghetto. And we walked around, and he pointed out the places where they lived, and he pointed out the jail where they kept people, including himself. He said he was actually put in the little Ostrowiec jail for a short while, and he was able to get out. And as we were walking around, he just kept saying, "Son of a gun, son of a gun." He didn't use gun, he used another word. And you could tell how he was reliving his experience of living in that ghetto. And of course, his family was there. He loved his family very much. It was pretty traumatic, as you might imagine. His family then was transported to Treblinka, which was a death camp. And this occurred in sometime in 1942. And basically, they were put on the boxcar, put in boxcars. The boxcars left. Nobody knew where they were going. And some of you who have probably studied a little bit about the Holocaust will know that Treblinka was just a pure death camp. Very, very few people survived, and it operated for a fairly short amount of time, and hundreds of thousands of people were murdered there, including most of my relatives, including my father's relatives. And at the time, of course, he did not know where they were going. It was only later on that they found out what happened in Treblinka. And he's going to talk a little bit about that now. And here's some information about the camp. I also visited Treblinka with my dad, and there's nothing there. It's a memorial. But you walk around, and there are headstones that represent all the small towns and villages where Jews lived and where they were transported to Treblinka to be murdered. It's quite an amazing sight.
And when we went to the big square, I took a look to my left, and I see they're selecting people over there. At this time, I saw to my older brother, next to me. I said, "Come on with me, I'm not going to go to the square." He said, "Come on." I grabbed him by the hand, and I said goodbye to my parents and relatives, you know, the dark faces, the sad faces, could never see, screaming and yelling people, you know, pushing and everything, not knowing what's going on. And I came to this selection that tried to push me in with my brother back over there. They didn't want it to go over there. I sneaked through. As I sneaked through, they put us in a small little street, you know, in a small little place. We were waiting. And later we marched in. And don't know where my parents went. They went through the same thing. They went into the boxcars, and they traveled. And later on I found out they went to Treblinka. As you know, Treblinka was a camp of no return. But that's what I was told. Between 700,000 or 800,000 people died over there. They went right away to the gas chambers and the crematoriums. There was a camp of that's where they went. That's where the most people went, from Ostrowiec, Radom, around the vicinity.
You mean your mother and father went to Treblinka?
Yeah, all of my relatives, my brothers and sisters, yes, except one brother who died in the partisans.
Except for you and your brother that separated yourself out from the family.
That's correct.
When you separated yourself out from the family, did you say anything to your own family about why you were separating yourself out?
Nothing. You see, you have to make quick decision. They do not know. They say goodbye. I waved goodbye to them. And I moved away right quick, not saying where I'm going or not.
What made you think that that was the thing to do?
I don't know, some intuition or something, a drive not to go. Because I was afraid if I'm going to go to the square, I didn't want to go away anymore, be transported or do something. I don't know what the other group was selected to. Took a chance.
And he survived. And his family did not. He was deported to Auschwitz in the summer of 1944. And here's a little bit of a map that gives you an idea of where Treblinka is, and Konin, and Ostrowiec, and Auschwitz-Birkenau. You may remember that we just commemorated the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau in January. They spoke about being on a death march, the people who could be on this march, and my father was on the death march, and he will speak about that a little bit later on. Inside here is the boxcar, which you will have an opportunity to go into. This is the boxcar that's been restored, that was brought over, like I mentioned, for the original Holocaust Museum. And as you can see, everybody getting on the boxcars. He's going to talk about in a moment what it was like coming into Auschwitz-Birkenau and how he was sent over to live as opposed to being sent over to the gas chambers and the crematorium. And bear in mind that the camp was 15 times the size of 11 times the size of Dallas, downtown Dallas. So it was a huge, huge facility, and there are a lot of sub-camps and labor camps all around. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Here they are lined up for the selection, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about and learned about.
To Birkenau, the boxcars opened, went down on the ramp, and we were waiting. As we were waiting, the orchestra was playing.
This was 1944.
44. The orchestra was playing. And I said to my friends, my God, take a look. We came into a paradise, clean, the orchestra is playing, welcoming us, everybody smiling and laughing. From the other side, on the other side of the ramp was the women's camp, FL, the Frauenlager, what you used to call. Half a dozen women came out and they were waving on us, smiling. I asked the prisoners over there, hey, what's going on? Where are we? The answer was a smile. Sure, they were not allowed. We were waiting. I looked to my right, and I saw smoke coming out from the chimneys, and I said to my friends, when they ask me what profession I am, I say I'm a baker. If I'm a baker, and they select me, I work in a bakery, I will never go around hungry. Okay.
It was not a bakery. So he went through the intake proceeding. They take your clothes away, they send you to a shower, they put a tattoo on you. The dehumanization process begins, because what they are basically doing is taking away your name, taking away your identity, and giving you a number. And as far as they were concerned, as far as the Germans who manned the concentration camp and the Nazis who were running the camp, that's all you are, is a number, totally dehumanized. And he's going to talk about that. Some information about the intake process. And of course, what everybody would try to do is maintain their humanity. And he'll also talk about that a little bit.
We walked in to another camp, not knowing what the camp is all about, what we call the quarantine camp. As we walked into the quarantine camp, you were waiting, you had to stretch out your arm. As you stretched out your arm, they gave you a number, a tattoo number. Oh, they give you the tattoo number. And as they gave me my tattoo number, B4990, the assessment came to me, and they says to me, do you know what this number all about? I said, no, sir. Okay, let me tell you now. You are being dehumanized. You a number. Still don't know what he was talking about. Okay, still don't know.
And of course, what it meant was that he just became a number. The conditions, of course, in the camps were unbelievable. You had tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of concentration camp inmates, capos, people running the camp, no food, people sent out to work, roll calls in the morning, roll calls in the evening, people dying of disease, starvation, people committing suicide on the electrified fence. And that's what my father's life was like every day. And one other thing that he did not mention, but I'll add in, is that only a couple of the camps did they put the number. So it was an A number, which was for Auschwitz, a B number, which is what he had, which was Birkenau, but most of the concentration camps didn't have numbers. The gas chambers, the crematorium, the Cyclone B, which was used in the gas chambers, and of course, no one survived the gas chambers.
How did I survive? I was a dreamer, a fantasizer. I tried to make myself human. Of course, they said I'm not. I saw birds flying into camp. I can see it right now when I'm talking to you. I'm in Birkenau, laying on the bunk. I could see birds flying in and picking on the ground. And I said to myself, what they can pick on the ground if we cannot see it? And they flew out. And I said, why can't I be a bird? And I said to myself, Mike, close your eyes and start to fantasize. I closed my eyes and I was a bird, and I flew out and I was free. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the same surrounding, but for the few moments when I was dreaming and fantasizing, I was a free person. I was free. I was somebody again. Did you ever see boxcars or railroad cars traveling on the rail? So nice and peacefully in different directions, nobody's telling them, where are you going? They're pulled. Nobody's asking for an identification card, no nothing. And I said to myself, isn't it nice and quiet? Why can't I be a boxcar? I changed myself for a plank of wood to be part of the boxcar, and I was traveling again. I was free again. The most precious thing a person can have or can possess is to be free. Make no difference what you have, how rich and how the luxuries you have. When you're not free, you are nothing. Dreaming and fantasizing, make myself always reminding myself that I'm a person like anybody else, kept me going. And I always say I never lost my hope, never lost my belief.
And I think you can notice how he's very much so involved in his memories of his experience. In January 1945, as I mentioned, the camp was liberated by the Soviet Army, by the Red Army. And just prior to them arriving at the camps, the Germans took all the people who could still walk, and they wanted to move them further into Germany. So that was what the Death March was all about. The people who couldn't make the Death March stayed in the camps, and they were liberated by the Red Army. Many of them wound up dying because they were in such terrible shape. Of course, some of them did survive through the help of the Red Army and their people when they came to the camp. So he's going to talk about the Death March. And here's a map of that, and here are the people who are walking on the Death March.
January the 18th, 1945, the Russian army are closing in. They stopped 40 kilometers, 27 miles from Auschwitz. They could walk in with one tank and liberate us. They gathered us in Auschwitz, 1 o'clock in the morning of the 19th. They took us out and we marching in snow, cold. 35 kilometers a day, no food, no water. I had plenty of water, snow. We're marching, don't know where we're going. People what could not make it, I can see it now, the people, they're staring at me. Because they fall back, they lost their wooden shoes in the deep snow, or they couldn't make it, they fall back. They were shot, not with a regular bullet, but with a dum-dum bullet, with a shadow bullet. If the person gets shot in their head, the head will split in dozens of pieces. The side of the roads, you can see it now, was not white. Everything was red.
Eventually, they were put on trains, and they were dispersed to different concentration camps in Germany and Austria. And my father wound up in Mauthausen, which is in Austria. There was a subcamp called Gusen II, and that's where he spent the rest of the war until he was liberated in early May 1945. And here is some information about Gusen II and Mauthausen. Again, when I was on one of the trips with my father, and my mother was with us, by the way, and later on my nieces were. I was with my dad, we were driving along the road, and I kind of look over and I see what looks to be the gate of a concentration camp. So we go back and we take a closer look at it, and that was the gate into Gusen II. Other than that, there was nothing left of the camp. And one of the things that was really truly incredible was that he goes underneath the gate, and he goes there with my mother, and he's holding her hand, and he's walking out. And he has this huge, huge smile on his face. It's like he's reliving his liberation. It was incredibly moving. It really was.
That took me down to Gusen. It was a small camp of 7,500 people. Every day used to bring up a transport of 1,000 or 1,500 people. Every day was the same amount of people. People died, new people came in. And they put me in to work in a factory building Messerschmitt planes. You know, the big Jaeger planes. And the factories were built already in the big mountains. Every day we used to get packed in the railroad cars, and we used to travel. It was too far to travel. They brought us back. I built a part in the plane, what we call the shot fender. It was a small little round piece. You know, you had to weld it, you know, electric welding, and I had to make nice 3 holes. Exactly had to be the 3 holes, because every time it was checked out to the 10th of a millimeter, and to the 3 holes, the 3 wires went back, but the pilot used to control the flaps in the back, slow it down and everything. But being in the underground, I say they're not going to get away with nothing. I was pretty fast to mix up things. The plane went up, the plane came down. They didn't know what happened. They thought there's something wrong with the aluminum. They used to come and try to test the aluminum. That's what I used to do to the last minute, till May the 5th, 1945. My friends, when I go to Israel or they're in Europe or someplace in the United States where we're in camp, they don't call me Mike. They call me partisan. They call me partisan. Everybody will call me partisaner. See, they're calling me by his name because they know, my friends, love friends might know, that's what I was doing.
Liberation, May 5th, like he said. And of course, the American Army liberated the camp that he was in. And he'll talk about the Hershey's candy bar, and I'll let him tell that. And here he is talking about being liberated. And bear in mind, of course, this is May 1945. It started in September 1939, so you're talking about a long time, not knowing from day to day whether you were going to survive.
I say, okay, I go out, and I waved to the tank. A guy comes out from the turret. I'm scared, you know, comes out from the turret. And he threw in a small little bar. I picked up was a bar of chocolate. I grabbed it and went into the barrack and I said, take a look. Can you imagine? They named this little chocolate Herschel. I couldn't spell the name Hershey. I said Herschel. Okay. It was delicious. It was delicious. And I looked out again to the window. And now we have a guy, a civilian with a red cross band, you know, with a soldier with a machine gun. And he waves and everybody's scared to go to the fence. I say, okay, I'm going to go. I went to the fence. The guy tells me in German, you are free now. The Americans are over here and stay in this camp. Wait over here. We're going to take you back to the main camp of Mauthausen. We're going to give you food and clothing. They told me I'm free. I was waiting for 5.5 years to hear this beautiful song, the beautiful melody that I'm free. I'm walking out from this camp. No camps for me anymore. Finally decided, next day we walked out from this camp. As I walked out on the other side of the barbed wire, I stopped and I looked. Nobody's waiting for me. Nobody's welcome me. Where do I go? I have no home to go home. And at this time I said to myself, Mike, don't you ever look back. Think positive and keep going. I kept going, went into Linz. And that's when I was liberated by the Americans, May the 5th, 1945.
So back to the Hershey's candies. Later on, there was a gentleman named Harry Schaefer who became very close to my parents, and he was in the liberating group of American soldiers who helped liberate Mauthausen-Gusen II. So whenever he came to Dallas, we would visit with him, but every year, around the time of the liberation, he would send my dad a bag of Hershey's Kisses to remind him of the Herschel candy bar. He was a really very nice gentleman. It's really amazing, the liberators, and how they liberated all these camps, and not only freed people such as my father, but they were able to come back and make lives for themselves. So my dad, after he was liberated, went across the border, and he lived in South Germany for a number of years in a small town called Mittenwald. He got certificates to teach physical education. He clerked in a store. He was a wonderful athlete, so he competed in track and field and gymnastics and soccer. And eventually he was finally able to get papers to come to the United States. I think one of the reasons I'm a lawyer, I practice immigration law. And one of the reasons that I practice immigration law is because of people like my father who came over here as a refugee. And I've always wanted to help people come to our great country. This is a picture of my dad leaning out of the railroad car, taking him to the coast where he would catch a boat to come to the United States. And that's his naturalization certificate. As you see, he had cut his hair very short, like a flat top. And he did that because he didn't want to have any hair that would get in the way of him playing soccer. And at that time, his legal name was still Mendel Jakubowicz. And it was only at that time, in 1957, when he became a citizen, that he legally changed his name to Michael Jacobs. And then below is, this picture was taken about a week before he passed away, or 2 weeks before he passed away. He would come to the Holocaust Museum every Saturday and Sunday and set up a table and talk about his experience and sell his memoirs. When he came to Dallas, he had a job waiting for him. He became a citizen, like I said, in 1957. He met my mother and got married. They had 4 children, myself, my sister Deborah, my brother Andrew, who is now deceased, and my youngest brother Reuben. And my sister married and has 4 daughters of her own and 9 grandchildren. So there's quite a nice legacy that my father had, and we're all very proud of all of them.
At this time, I said to myself, I will never stop talking, if people want to listen to me or not. I have 2 people. If they listen for 5 minutes, they walk away, I accomplish 5 minutes. And I never stopped, because it's very close to me. Again, that people should know about it. This generation and generations to come, it should never happen again. I don't want the people here in the United States, what they say was no Holocaust. Hundreds of books are written about there was no Holocaust. The Holocaust is a hoax. Auschwitz is a myth. It was never Auschwitz. Those people, when they come out and tell this story or write about the Holocaust, was no Holocaust, was a hoax. Those are the most dangerous people walking in this United States, because those people want you and the future generation to believe that was not happening, that was not true. And again, that people be caught off guard. God forbid if those people get the power, they will do exactly the same thing, maybe worse. We must know, we must remember, we must not forget. We must always say in our mind, it can happen again. We must not be indifferent.
So this is his legacy, as I was stating. My parents, the four of us, holding a couple of grandchildren, and here's a picture of my father as a referee. And then on the picture with the big group picture, of course, that's everybody. The nieces and their spouses, the grandchildren at the time. And he unfortunately passed away in July 2024, and of course he's missed. He would be very proud of this facility. He would be so happy that you guys are here today, hearing his story and viewing the Holocaust Museum. We hope that you will continue understanding what happened about the Holocaust, that you'll stand up against anti-Semitism, racism, misogyny, all the things that people want to do to other people. It's up to us to make sure that nothing gets by. It's up to us to be upstanders, to create a wonderful country that we live in, to make it better. It's up to us to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. And thank you very much for listening to me. I think questions will be right here. And again, thank you for being here.
Mark, thank you so much. Your father would be very proud that you're continuing his legacy. If you have questions, write them on the note card and hold them up, and our staff will come by and pick them up. We have a few starters, but I wanted to tell you, I'm not sure if you know this, that the first time I visited our previous museum, which was right across the Dart Rail it's probably about 2009, I came on a Sunday afternoon, and your dad was there, and he walked me through the museum. Isn't that amazing? He was incredible. So your father mentioned that he had a brother who died in the partisans. Was this the one that stayed back with him from the train? Can you share what your dad may have known about his time, your brother's time as a partisan, and his eventual death?
Yes. So one of the brothers became a partisan, which is basically somebody who they went out in the forests and they fought against the Nazis. There were several different groups. He learned later on that he was killed by another partisan group, unfortunately. So, of course, he didn't find that out until much later on. Unfortunately, a lot of these partisan groups fought among themselves, and they sometimes would kill other partisans. And that was, truly tragic. But at least he had some hand in trying to fight the Germans and fight the Nazis. And of course, a lot of people say, well, why didn't you defend yourselves? And they did. They became partisans. My dad talked about sabotaging the planes when he was in Gusen. There are all these little things that you did to resist. So it's just a big lie that people didn't try to do something. Right. A lot of times you couldn't do a whole lot, but you did what you could.
Did your father have any family members that survived? Any cousins or?
There are a couple of first cousins who he came to find out later on had survived after the war. In Germany, he was able to find a first cousin named Abraham Soika, who eventually immigrated to Montreal, and we were very close to. There are a couple of other first cousins who survived, and they wound up with their siblings in South Africa or in Israel. And I have been able to meet all these relatives, and it's, of course, they have their stories to tell. And when they were found by my father, they were able to get together, and it was really quite wonderful that at least he was able to find some relatives.
Absolutely. Before your father did the interview that we saw, and that would have been in the 80s?
I think so.
Yeah. Did he share his experiences with you and your family?
Yes, we kind of grew up hearing all the stories, but it's a little bit different when it's your dad, because that was just who he was, and whenever we ask questions, he would answer the questions, and even if we didn't ask questions, he would tell us anyway. But he always would share with us, and we always knew his story. Unfortunately, there are a lot of survivors out there who did not tell their stories. And I've run into people over the years who are second generation. They knew nothing about their parents' experiences until they became adults. And you can imagine what that must have been like, finding out when you're in your 20s or your 30s that your parents were Holocaust survivors. And because they weren't in Auschwitz-Birkenau, they didn't have the number. But he spoke all the time. He would go to church groups, school groups. He spoke all the time at the Holocaust Museum. That was just his mission, was to educate people and let people know about his experience. He was very, very committed to that. And I would say after he retired, he was probably speaking sometimes 10 or 15 times a month to different groups. So that was his job after he retired from the scrap business. And by the way, he went into the scrap business. So we had Jacobs Iron and Metal Company, and ironically, when he was talking about when he was in the concentration camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau, one of the things he did had to do with a scrapyard. So he kind of learned his trade in the camp.
Can you tell us a little more about your father? He was one of the leaders in building our first museum, and can you tell us about that process?
Sure. So he was very committed, of course, to building a museum, like we've said before, and there were several survivors who were very involved in that, including the gentleman whose picture you saw earlier, and there are a few other people who were involved in that, and they had an idea. They had an architect who came up with a mock-up of a Holocaust center, and it was about this big, and he would take it around and visit people to raise money. He would show it to anybody who wanted to take a look at it. There was a big Holocaust survivors meeting in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia around that time, and he took it with him to show people about it, because there weren't any Holocaust museums back in those days. I think the one that we had in Dallas was the first one that was not affiliated with a university in the country. And they raised $300,000, $400,000 to build the first Holocaust museum, which was only about 2,500 square feet, in stark contrast to this facility, which is how many square feet?
55,000.
Pardon?
55,000.
And raised how much money?
We raised $79.5 million, to build this museum.
So,
but it's based on this legacy that started back in 1984.
So it was a big deal when the Holocaust Museum opened in the Jewish Community Center. And just another thing about the bringing the boxcar over, it was a tremendous effort to get it here. It had to come by ship, had to dock in Galveston, I believe. They had to bring it up here by truck. And all the people who were involved in it donated the services of the shipping companies and the truck company. The only thing that they had to do when they brought it over here was pay whatever import fees that the U.S. government had at that time. It was truly an amazing journey of the boxcar. And it sat in the parking lot of the Jewish Community Center for a couple of weeks while the space was being prepared for it, and people would come at night and during the day, and the boxcar was open, and leave flowers in the boxcar. And that still happens sometimes with the boxcar that we have here. Same boxcar, by the way.
And it is, to give you some context, how extraordinary it was that Dallas had the first museum that wasn't affiliated with a college or university. There were only 125 survivors living in North Texas at the time. And as comparison, there are 15,000 survivors still living in New York City. So it was a very, very small group, but they were very, very driven. And your dad was chief among the leaders. Your father's memory was so impeccable, especially enduring all those things as a teenager. How do you think he remembered those things for so many years?
They were imprinted on in his mind and in his soul. And one of the things that he used to always talk about was that he felt like he survived and wanted to survive because he needed to be a witness. So everything that happened to him, he wanted to remember, and he just did. You know, it's just something that you do, and because it was so important to him to be able to tell his story. And I think also, as far as his family goes, he wanted to remember them as well, and what happened to them, and to memorialize them, since there was no one else to memorialize them. I think that Philip would probably say the same thing about his dad, how you just remembered. You just remembered.
Yeah. Did your father ever talk about the moment that he knew his family had died?
Boy. I don't know that he really found out until a little bit later on what happened at Treblinka. And of course, he was sad, but I don't exactly remember when he told us that we always knew that they died in Treblinka, but we didn't know anything really specific about what happened.
Okay.
How's that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, there was so much that was unknown at the time. He didn't know where they were going at first. Your father talked about resistance and making the parts for the plane. Did he talk about other forms of resistance in the camps?
They had a uprising in Auschwitz-Birkenau back in 1944, and it was an uprising that was organized by the concentration camp inmates, where they were able to smuggle in some guns, and the whole point was to try and destroy the crematorium. And he was involved in that. And unfortunately, word got out that it was going to happen, so the people who were going to blow up the crematorium had to start a day earlier. So it didn't go off quite as successfully as they had hoped, but at least it was a real moment of resistance. And the Germans were extremely unhappy that people were able to do this. A number of people were able to escape, most of whom were killed by the Nazis, by the Germans, soon after they escaped. And of course, bear in mind that you had a lot of farmers and village people who, if they caught it, somebody came in, they would just turn the people in. And they, of course, it was hard to hide people, because if you got caught, your whole family got killed by the Germans. So it was a very tough thing for people to hide out in the forests.
Can you share more about how your father met your mother in Dallas?
Sure, it's a great story.
Yeah.
My mother worked at the Jewish Community Center. As I mentioned before, she was involved in the phys ed department. My dad was teaching aerobics, what we call aerobics now. Back then they called calisthenics. And basically somebody got my mother and they said, hey, we want you to come over and see this guy who just came over from Europe. He's a concentration camp survivor. He hardly speaks any English, and look how he's able to control the people whose class he was teaching. So my mother goes and watches him with the whistle. He's able to run the whole class, and that's how they met and started dating and eventually got married. My brother Reuben was visiting South Africa a number of years later, and he was going through some mementos, basically, and he found this sheet of paper, and in English, I'm sure it was translated. Basically, it was from my father to one of his first cousins who had gone to South Africa before the Holocaust, and it basically said, "I met the love of my life, and I plan to marry her," and he was, of course, referring to my mother. So it was very, very sweet. And they were married for just over 60 years. And they were, I'm sure it was a little bit of a challenge sometimes for my mother because of the Holocaust part of it. But they supported each other in everything they did. And it was, they were wonderful parents. And of course, we missed them quite a bit. And Dad always would speak with great pride about my mother. And one of the things he really liked doing was dancing the polka with her.
They were an amazing couple. You spoke earlier, I think at the beginning, Mark, about the fact that there's Holocaust denial and distortion today. What would you say, or how would you recommend that we speak out against Holocaust denial?
I think just to tell people, you don't know what you're talking about. Tell them to come to the Holocaust Museum so they can see. I think that a lot of the people who talk about Holocaust denial know that it happened. They just can't live with the thought that something so awful could happen. You can talk about how the museum exists, that you've spoken to people who have a direct connection because of our parents with the Holocaust, that it's terrible that they believe that way, and some of that borders on anti-Semitism. And you just have to point out, and again, it's not just with Holocaust survivors and the Holocaust, but it's with any sort of racism or misogyny or prejudice. We have to stand up and remind people that they're just not right. They need to be educated. They need to be more interested in how life really exists. And as far as the Holocaust denial, that's where it starts, is to tell people, of course it happened, and you need to get educated about it.
If you go through the permanent exhibition in the Human Rights Wing, which is the middle ring, the final gallery is about teaching the process of genocide. And your dad mentioned dehumanization. That's always a stage of genocide. It's easier to kill someone if you view them as less than human. The final stage of genocide is always denial. So it certainly doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but perpetrators always deny. So it's really important to stand up and to know the truth. Mark, do you have any recommendations for books for young readers wanting to learn more about the Holocaust?
Well, there's always my dad's memoir, which is available in the bookstore.
Yeah.
And there are lots and lots and lots of memoirs out there. And I think there are probably some memoirs that are directed towards young adults and children. I kind of think that you probably have to be a little old enough to be able to handle a lot of what happened in the Holocaust. So I would say 10, 12, 11, 12 is a good age to start teaching it. And I'm sure that there's probably a list of good books that the museum can provide.
Absolutely. Do you remember in your dad's book the passage about being on the bus, really talking about the civil rights movement here in the United States?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah. Do
Sorry.
you remember it
That's
enough
not
to
specific
share?
right now.
No?
No, I'll let you can, if you remember. No.
Well, his dad spoke about being appalled that in the United States that people had to drink in different water fountains and that African Americans had to move to the back of the bus. And I think in the book he says he got up and went to the back of the bus.
Right. Yeah. And I grew up in Dallas, and of course back then there were still Jim Crow laws. So we would take my grandfather and my siblings would go downtown, and back then there were still a lot of segregation, different water fountains. It's not that long ago, and we have to be very vigilant against all forms of hate and separation.
So, final question: what gives you hope right now? It's
Wow.
a tough question, right?
Yeah, a very tough question. I think what gives me hope, and I think what gave my father hope, and I think probably gives other survivors hope, and the second generation and third generation, is that we would like to believe that people are basically good, and they just need to be educated and understand that. And my dad used to talk about this. It's a lot easier to be kind to people than to be hateful to people, and kindness is catching, and you're kind to one person, and that spreads to other people. And being hateful really destroys you inside. So I kind of have hope that things will always get better, but it's our responsibility to make things better, to help things get better, and we do that through just being good people. We go to our religious institutions. We learn from our parents. We learn from our schools how to be good people, and we just have to practice that.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your dad's story, for carrying on his legacy. We'll be continuing this series through the end of next week, and our next speaker is survivor Hannah Schraub, who will share her story of arrest and deportation in Westerbork transit camp, which was in Holland. And she was transferred to other camps and liberated by the U.S. Army in France in late 1944. So we hope you'll consider joining us for that, either virtually or in person. And if you'd like to meet Mark and come up and ask him any questions, you are welcome to come up on the stage and visit with him after our talk. Thank you so much for being here. Have a great rest of your day.